All right, guys, we'll go ahead and get started. Hope everyone's doing well today. Again, my name is Allie Cantrell. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach with Alabama Cattlemen Association. Today, we're going to have Ellie Watson from the Department of Ag and Sweet Grown Alabama program talking to discuss marketing and local meat products. And then Alex Teague is also going to come on and talk about how pricing works for these local products. Throughout this session, please keep your microphones muted and type any questions you may have into the chat box. I'll be monitoring the questions as they come in. And if I feel like it's important to address the question in the moment, then I'll pause the speaker to ask. If not, we'll save the question for the last 15 minutes of the session. You're also always welcome to email or call any one of us after the session should any questions after the session's over. So again, with us today is Ellie Watson. She's the director of the Sweet Alabama program. It's the state's newest agricultural branding program. Ellie grew up on a row crop farm in North Alabama and graduated from Auburn University's College of Agriculture with a degree in ag communications. I'm excited that she's here with us today, and with that, I'll turn it over to her.
Thanks, Allie. I appreciate y'all including me, even though I am the outsider row crop girl. I still love my cattle and other meat farmers. So I'm thankful for what you all do for our state and the awesome products that y'all produce. So we're just going to talk a little bit today about, now you've gotten this great animal grown and you've gotten this product processed, but now what do we do with our product once we get to this point? So we're going to go ahead and just jump right in and talk about kind of the next steps of what do you do with your products when they're ready. So the first thing that I really want to stress to y'all and just want y'all to be aware of is that you have a special product. What you have grown is so different than what consumers are used to seeing in the grocery store. So kind of hit some highlights of talking points basically that you can use, whether you're talking to your friends about purchasing local or if you're on social media or any other outlet that you use to promote your product. These are just some things that you need to remember, and remember that you're special for, and remember to take advantage of. And honestly, we need to use them to our advantage. So when a consumer is looking at labels, and y'all know how much misinformation there is in agriculture and how confusing labels and brands and specializations and all of these things that we see on our packages can be. I think consumers easily get worn out and don't understand what they're looking at, and they don't know what it means when something says it's non-GMO or hormone free or antibiotic free. They don't get all that. So sometimes it can be overwhelming, but I think that local is something that they all know is good. And they all know that supporting local and supporting someone that they can look in the eye and ask questions about how their product was grown, that goes a long way. So I encourage you, if you're in this venture or are planning to get in this venture, don't be afraid to answer questions. Don't be afraid to, kind of play that role of educator and advocate for agriculture, because people see you as an expert. You know more than anyone about how your product is grown and the ways that we do things in agriculture and why we do things like we do them. So take advantage of that. Don't forget how cool that is and what a special place that you're in. So I know Allie's going to put this presentation up later too, and feel free to use these talking points on social media and on other platforms. You know exactly who, how, and where your product was grown if you buy from a local farmer. You know who has touched your product from the time that it has been raised as an animal until it's been processed, until it's been actually put into the supply chain. So those are things that, people care about, especially now in the times of COVID-19. It's scary to think, who all has touched my products and where have they been and how do I know if this is safe? But if you can tell a consumer exactly where that product was raised its whole life, exactly who processed that product, and then who's been touching it since, that's something that can go a long way and be an advantage for you as well. Supporting a family farm and a local economy, you are just as much marketing yourself as you're marketing your local product. And, that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about when we start talking about social media and its power. But remember that people want to believe in something and want to support something that is wholesome. And there's nothing more wholesome, in my opinion, than family farms. There's actually a study that Nielsen, the company, did in 2019 that says that 46% of consumers want to support local. They want to find those local products and get that high quality local food product. So consumers are on your side. We just have to remember to promote the things that we're good at. And you are great at farming and great at doing those things. So do not be ashamed of being a self-promoter in any stretch of the imagination. Kind of the next piece of this conversation is, where do I sell my product? And so if you are doing custom slaughter and selling an animal by the half or the whole or the quarter, these three markets are not necessarily going to apply to your product, but we're going to talk a lot about social media too. So don't give up on me. I think that, social media is critical for those custom animals just as much as it is if you have an actual meat product in a package that you're ready to sell to a consumer. So don't give up on us for you custom folks that are selling whole animals. But this primarily right now will speak to folks that have a individual cut of meat that they're trying to sell to a consumer. So really, I know that this is not an extensive list on how you sell your product, but I think this is a good start. And for all of our folks that I work with in the state of Alabama, they are able to sell all of their supply through these avenues. They don't have any issues with the way that demand is right now, getting rid of product through these areas. I encourage you to be creative, and if you think of other cool ways that you can partner with groups and get your product sold, then absolutely do that. But if you're looking for just some pretty simple, foolproof ways to sell your product, these are kind of the big ones that I want to hit on briefly. So first of these is on farm. To me, this is the easiest, simplest way to sell your product, especially if you do a pre-order and then allow consumers to come in, maybe one Saturday after your animal has been processed and purchase all of the product that you have for sale. So, you're gonna have to consider several things, of course, before you're ready to sell on farm. But really, once you make decisions about how you want to price your product, and if you would like to sell, on your farm, then you can decide, am I going to do pre-orders? Am I going to allow consumers to pay me with check? Am I going to set up a way for consumers to pay me with card? Or am I going to only accept cash? These are things that are going to vary based on your farm situation and based on how much product you have available, and maybe even on your freezer space. That's something that you're going to have to consider if you have that freezer space available on farm. What, a perfect world to me, what I think would be a really cool and simple way to handle things is to put out a list of prices on social media. So you publish your price list on Facebook on, let's say, June 1st, and tell consumers that they have until June 10th to pre-order your product. And you get a list of everyone that wants to purchase, 3 pounds of ground beef, or, roasts or steaks or whatever other products that you want to sell. You go ahead and get those orders in, and then schedule pickup times for those folks to come out to the farm, pay you with a check or with a card. If you're looking at doing some card payments, whether it's on the farm or at a farmer's market, you can do those through platforms like Square, or QuickBooks has a way that you can sell online through, card invoicing, and as well as swipe cards. So I encourage you to kind of look into those and think about those logistic details before you decide how you're going to sell and where you're going to sell. But on farm, to me, is just the easiest and, less stress on you as a farmer. However, there's some important things to consider. Having people come to your farm obviously does hold a little bit of liability. Alabama law protects farmers who have people on their farm, but make sure that you know the ins and the outs of that and what that looks like, because you don't ever want to get into a situation where you have hurt yourself more than helped yourself. So just be considerate of those kind of secondary things you have to think about. If you live 45 minutes, if your farm is, 45 minutes from the nearest town, it may be tough to get people to come out and do a pickup on Saturday. But if you can rope something else in with that, if you have a local produce farmer that also wants to sell his products, he might come out and set up and y'all can sell beef and produce and maybe have a viewing area where consumers can check out, a mama cow and her babies and, really feel like they're getting that on farm experience. So really just be creative as to what you think works best for your farm. I do think that selling on farm though is a really easy and simple way on you to get that product sold. You can schedule the pickup date for right after your process date, so that sorry y'all, so that a consumer can come right out to the farm and get that product and it's convenient for you. You don't have to store it for a long time. Kind of another way that is an option for you to sell those state and federally inspected meat products is at a restaurant or at a store. So if you have a store like Sweet Creek or George's Family Market, which is what you see there in the picture, or a small gas station even that has freezer space that may be interested in selling local meat, that's certainly an opportunity and something that you as the farmer can approach that store or that restaurant and work with them to establish relationships and build that connection to potentially open yourself up to a whole new market. That could be a one-stop drop-off of all of your product and then allowing that store to sell your product for you. Of course, you might look at the costs associated with that, because sometimes if the store is actually going to purchase that product for you and then sell it for you, they're going to want to pay wholesale prices more than likely. So you might not get that retail price that you would get if you sold on your farm or at the farmer's market. So that's an important consideration, but it's not to say that some of these folks wouldn't work on consignment. So if you ask a store to go in partnership with you and hold your products and consign it for you, and you're still making the profit and they're getting a little bit of a cut from that, it's nothing is out of the realm of possibility, I guess is what I'm saying here. Be creative, use connections that you already have in your communities. The places where people shop and where people might want to buy local products. Use those connections if you're not interested in having folks on your farm or selling at the farmer's market. The other kind of piece of that is, don't forget the power of some of these high-end restaurants, because they love having a featured dish that is, Watson Farms beef, a specialty steak or whatever it may be. You probably don't have the supply to completely stock that restaurant for an entire week or their entire existence, but they could do a specialty dish featuring your local product. So I would encourage you, if you want to approach a local restaurant, to tell them, I'd love to come and I'd love to share videos on your social media pages about my farm, and really pump up this experience so that a consumer can get the full farm to table dinner, and then hopefully that restaurant can pay you a premium for your product because it's so much better than what they're getting off the back of a truck. So those are some things to consider, but going to require a little more effort and a little more creativity than it would just to kind of sell at your farm or at your market. So depends on kind of what works best for you and what you're comfortable with and what ventures you are want to take on. So the kind of third piece of this is farmers markets. Allie asked me to talk a little bit about the ins and outs of farmers markets. So meat at farmers markets is not a new thing. It is something that we see across the state, and we see farmers successfully selling their meat products at farmers markets. So in that photo there, you see HD Farm. It's out of East Aboga. He does pasture-raised lamb, and he has really good success at the Pepper Place Market in Birmingham with some of our, international consumers and others. And it's a great opportunity for him to connect with consumers and people that he wouldn't necessarily be able to get out on his farm in East Aboga. So farmers markets do have certain rules and regulations that come along with them, but really for meat producers, the big important thing to know is that you can bring your product in a cooler. Of course, freezer is going to be preferable for these markets, but If you don't have a freezer and a generator, or if your market doesn't have a freezer and access to power, then you're going to have to, of course, be creative. And so you, by the health department, are allowed to bring your product in a cooler if it is frozen when it gets there, and you must keep it frozen until it's sold. So if the health department comes by and you have some frozen meat sitting in melted ice, they're not going to be happy about that. You got to keep that product on ice, keep it cold, keep it frozen to meet all of the health department regulations. So you can bring a cooler, bring extra ice, make sure that product stays cool and frozen, especially, some of our Alabama summer mornings get really, really hot really fast. So just be prepared on how you do that. A lot of markets allow you just to drive up in the back of a truck and park your product there right in front of your table. That is a great way. If you do have a freezer that'll fit in the back of the truck, that's a great easy way to do that. Then put up signage about the different products you have available, like you see Mr. Henry has done here, so that consumers know what they're purchasing. Because if you think about your produce neighbors, they're going to have their product all out on the table. So you want to make sure that they know what's in the cooler. And I would encourage you to do that with prices so they know exactly what they're getting and what they're paying for that product. The other cool thing about markets is that you can cook samples. So if you have maybe an interesting cut that you want to promote that you're trying to sell, or if you just want to cook, steak kebabs or little beef meatball sliders or whatever it might be, you can cook that product. And we all know that nothing smells better than a cut of meat on the grill. That will draw people to your table. It'll bring the customers right over and practically sell itself. So that's something to consider too if you go to markets. Think about ways that you can make your product stand out and make your customers flock to you so you don't have to work as hard. There are considerations though with a market. That's going to be maybe weekly, or some markets are even daily, that you go out there and set up and sit there and try to sell your product. It's not going to be like having folks come to your farm and just pick up all at once. So consider those things. You don't have to do pre-orders. You can take, just people first come, first serve, buy whatever products they are available when they get there. So different considerations, a little bit less work on the front end, but definitely more effort to spend the time out there on the back end. So whatever works best for you and whatever you prefer. Also at the farmer's market, I encourage you to still answer those questions that people have. Tell people what's special about your product and why they should support local. And, they will fall in love with you as a person and then fall in love with your product and continue to be a repeat customer. If you want to get involved with your local farmers market, the best way to do that is just find that market manager in your town. If you don't know who the market manager is, find the market on Facebook and just send them a message, or call the city and ask, hey, who runs the farmers market? How do I get in touch with them? They typically do charge a nominal fee to participate. So, you might be looking at $20, $30 to have a booth set up at your local market. But if you're selling enough product, then that of course pays for itself. So just consider those things, and I encourage you to find those local markets in your area. If you have trouble finding a market, don't hesitate to reach out to me or Allie or some of the others. I know we work with folks at the markets constantly and would be happy to help you connect with a local farmers market in your area. Be aware too that some of those have wait lists, so they might limit their meat vendors to only 2 meat vendors, or they might have a limit on the overall number of vendors. So be aware that you might need to get on that wait list, when you know your processing date, and don't just wait until you have a product that you're trying to sell to try to get on that wait list, because some of those markets, especially in larger cities, are a little bit harder to get into. All right, so we're going to kind of transition out of where to sell and talk more about how to advertise. So for those of you that are doing custom processed stuff, this fits right in with you too. You have to get those animals sold by quarters, halves, or wholes. You have to get that meat product sold. We're kind of all in the same boat here. And I've already mentioned it, but I don't want this to be lost. I want to say this as much as I can. you are selling yourself more than anything. People want to support local and they want to know who they're buying from and they want to be able to ask you questions. So keep that in mind, interact with consumers and really just be aware that you're selling your farm just as much as the product, no matter which one of these advertising routes that you take. So obviously, lots of ways to advertise. This is also not extensive, but here's some really foolproof ways that I think could work for local products that you have going on. Local newspaper is an easy, typically pretty cheap way to advertise, but there is a cost associated with that. I encourage you to look into that and see if it might work for your farm. Word of mouth is huge, free way to advertise. Tell people at your church, at your children's schools, at your baseball games, whatever it may be, you can use word of mouth to advertise and sometimes sell all you have just based on people talking about your product. Another, option, if you feel like your farm is at that level and if you want to put that effort into it, you can set up a website and get email lists and ask people to subscribe to your blog and send updates from your farm. That is something that I see many of my Sweet Grown Alabama members doing successfully, but that's a lot of work. It's going to take some time and energy to build a website and send emails, and a lot of us don't have time for that, especially if you have other things going on and other areas of the farm to manage. So again, you have to decide if that's what works best for your farm, then by all means that is certainly successful, but it is going to be a big commitment to keep up a website and a blog and an email list. So what I would recommend for those of us that want to farm, that's what we want to spend our time doing. We don't want to be marketers. We don't want to have to do all these technical ins and outs of the internet. Set up social media pages for your farm. That is an easy, free, simple way, and I would say with confidence, one of the best ways to get your word out about your farm and the products that you have for sale. So we'll talk about that more in detail. But there's also opportunity with Sweet Grown Alabama, my organization, to help market your product. And I'm going to talk about that too. But just know there's lots of ways to market. You just have to find the way that works best for your farm. Facebook is my absolute favorite and what I would recommend that you all do as far as social media. So you have Pinterest and Instagram and Twitter and lots of other social media platforms that you could use for your farm. And by all means, if you have time, go for it. We'd love to see all of your beautiful products on those platforms. But Facebook is incredibly successful at helping market businesses and helping find those people that want to buy your products. They want to be able to keep up with what you have going on, and Facebook is the easiest way for them to do that and the easiest platform for you to update. So if you don't have a farm Facebook page, I have dropped in a link here, and this presentation will be available a little bit later on, so you can directly click this link, or you can just do a simple search, set up a farm business page or set up a business Facebook page. There are, two basic things that I want you to be aware of when it comes to setting up a page. Don't set it up as a personal profile. You have two separate kind of avenues on Facebook. You can set up a personal profile with your name and your farm name, and people will have to add you as a friend, and that is certainly appropriate for your personal self. And I encourage you to be friends with your customers if you're comfortable with that. No issues at all there. But for people that might not actually be friends and people that you might not actually know, that might just be interested in learning about what you have going on, they want to find a Facebook business page where they can actually go to your page and just click like. They don't have to add you as a friend. They don't have to, know who you are. They can just like your page, and you don't follow them back or anything. You don't have to reciprocate, but they can keep up to date with what's going on with your farm through a Facebook business page. So I first and foremost encourage you all to do that if you don't have a page already. Very easy to set up, and would also be happy to kind of help with that in any way that I can. We are also putting together a webinar for Sweet Grown Alabama members that will be a tutorial step-by-step how to set up a Facebook page for your farm and how to keep that updated. and what kind of content should share. So that's kind of the next thing is I have a Facebook page, but I never take the time to update it, or it's just too much work to update it. This comes back to kind of what I talked about in the beginning. Be authentic. People just want to see what's going on and what you're doing. Use photos in every single post if you have the opportunity. Just snap a quick photo of whether you're trying to, sell a product. Snap a quick photo of a package of ground beef and update your status. I have 10 1-pound ground beef packages left. Hurry in before they're all gone. Simple is best. Keep it very simple and keep it just easy to use. It doesn't have to be professional photography. We all have, these phones that you can just snap a quick picture. I do recommend that you take your pictures landscape, sideways here, not up and down, because that does look a little bit better on a Facebook page. So snap a quick picture, whether that's of ground beef or whether that's of, a calf in the pasture, whatever it might be. Use photos with your posts. If you want to really take your post to the next level, you can also go to canva.com. That will allow you to jump back here a second. Things that we saw like this from Sullivan Creek Ranch, that graphic, you can create those on the website called Canva. So it allows you to drop in a photo, put text over a photo. You can put, something simple, beef available now, pork available now, over just a simple photo. It gets people's attention on social media, and it's just always better to have a picture attached because of Facebook's algorithms and the way they work. So use Canva if you are wanting to kind of step up to the next level, create your own graphics, get a grandchild or a kid involved. If you are not comfortable with those things, ask them to make a few posts for you. It's a fun website to use. The most important thing too, when you think about Facebook or any social media, is to think like a consumer. Y'all know that when we say words like slaughtered or meat hanging or any of these things, it doesn't make us bat an eyelid. It's something that you're used to in the industry. What it means, and how to humanely raise these animals, and that they are here to serve a purpose for us and to feed us. But y'all, a lot of people don't understand that. They don't, get to live the agricultural life, and they get squirmish when you say things like slaughtered or kill floor, or some of these words that are really normal for us to use. So I encourage you that you can just take a step back before you post anything and think, how is the most different consumer from me going to look at this post, and how are they going to interpret what I'm saying? It's really easy to make swaps like, our animal is getting slaughtered today. You can say, we will have beef available tomorrow. You can make simple improvements to our language and the way that we share our story so that consumers don't get all crazy on us. I know that we never want to be dishonest. We want to be authentic, and we want to share the ups and downs of agriculture, but we really want to be careful when we're speaking to consumers, how we approach that, and the words that we use and the photos that we use. So, we don't want to see videos of, baby calves crying when they're being weaned. People don't want to see that. People will come back and say, oh, you're terrible. Why are you doing that? But, we understand the industry, they don't. So just think about what you post. Post, clean photos of animals. We, I think saw in Alex's presentation Monday, photos of cows that look sick and just sad. And people don't want to see that. They want to see good, clean, healthy animals, just like your processor wants to see them. So think about what's in the background of your photos and just what's happening around you. And, if you've got an area that has old tractors and barbed wire and all these other things, might be best to leave that out of the pictures with the animals, so that people don't think they have a chance to hurt themselves or any of these things that so easily get misconstrued by animal activists and by consumers alike. We are unfortunately targeted even when you do the right thing. So just be careful about what you post. I don't want any of you to ever get into a situation where people are questioning you. So be authentic, but be careful what you post. Be funny, share your farm story, share pictures of what's going on at the farm, share, if you have a kiddo that tracks manure in on his boots, share a cute, funny picture about family life and how you're operating on the farm. People love to see those things. They love to know that you're a family just like they are, that you're a person just like they are. So quick and easy posts go a really long way to sharing, what you have for sale and then getting people's business, because that's what this all ultimately boils down to, is making money and making sure that you can sell the product that you have available. This is just a couple examples, and I encourage you to follow other farmers that are doing, direct to consumer meat sales so that you can get examples of how to share on social media. On the left side, you see Peak Farms up in Athens. They just posted a really quick photo of a roast that they were making for dinner, and you can see that they had a nice little caption about everything that needed to go on the farm, but that they were just throwing this roast in and looking forward to a rescue dinner. Very easy, something that they were doing anyways by eating dinner. And they posted a photo of that to encourage consumers to, hey, look at our great product. You can also post pictures on the farm side. So, you want to share the product as much as you can, and you want to post pictures of the product, but you share the farm side too. So especially for those of you who are doing custom slaughter, where you may not have an individually packaged product to display to that consumer, you can share your animals. In this picture from Rockhouse Farms, they're up in Fruithurst. You can see how clean those animals are and how healthy they look. And you can tell from that text that they care about the animal and that they're going to raise this animal in a humane way and take care of it. And it's going to be a healthy product when it's processed. They're honest. They talk about sometimes farming is hard, but look what we can produce and look how cool it is to see this life grow. So be honest, be authentic, be cognizant of what your photos look like when you post. Be prepared. I posted a video of some cows on Sweet Grown Alabama's page the other day, and the first comment was, man, I can't look at that animal. I like beef and I know we have to eat it, but I just don't like looking at that animal. It makes me sad. So just be prepared. When you post pictures and videos of your animals, you're going to get that, and people are going to have those comments. So either know what to respond or don't respond. But if you can, I encourage you to respond to consumers. If you're going to post something about antibiotics and vaccines, make sure that you know what you're talking about and that you can answer questions when people have them. If you don't want to have those conversations, just don't post those pictures. Just leave that out of the conversation. But if you're confident and want to be that advocate for the industry, I encourage you to do that. We need more people speaking up and more farmers that are on the offense instead of us just being on the defense every time some industry or PETA group says that what we're doing is negative. So just make sure that you are prepared to defend what you post. All right, so I'm going to transition out of kind of the marketing world for a second and talk to y'all about Sweet Grown before I let Alex talk to us about pricing. So just briefly, I want you to know kind of the services that Sweet Grown Alabama can offer to your farm and why you should even care about it and why it matters. And so what our program is, we're basically a nonprofit association. We have support from the Department of Agriculture, the Farmers Federation, Alabama Ag Credit, First South Farm Credit, the Porch Creek Indians, the Co-op, and the RC&D Association. So pretty good support across the board in the industry. Other groups like Cattlemen and Poultry and Egg and fruit and vegetable growers, they all support our mission and are associate members of our program. So we really are for the industry. That's what is exciting about Sweet Grown Alabama, is that it's a way to connect all of our industry groups together for one purpose, and that is to connect Alabama farmers and families. So our whole organization exists to help Alabama consumers find your products and to get a better price for your products. We've said from day one that if Alabama farmers aren't making more money because of our program, that we will quit. We are not going to spend unnecessary money unless it's actually helping the economy and the agriculture industry in Alabama. So that's a little bit just about us and how we got started. Basically, you are going to be a part of a branding program if you join Sweet Grown Alabama, similar to Georgia Grown or Fresh from Florida. You know, this is not a earth-shattering idea by any means, but it's something that Alabama has been lacking for years. And I've been so thrilled within the first, 7 or 8 months of our membership. We opened in September of 2019, that meat products have been a huge part of what we're able to promote through Sweet Grown Alabama. Everyone said, that's only going to be produce, that's not going to be anything else, but we have seen a huge response from meat producers. So about 20% of our membership is actually folks that are strictly doing meat sales direct to consumer. So we'd love to continue growing that, and that's something that I get asked about all the time. I was able to be interviewed by one of the local Birmingham news stations and had my inbox flooded with consumers looking for beef specifically, just wanting to find local beef. And I was able to point them to our database that I'm going to show y'all in just a second. So really would encourage you to consider looking into Sweet Grown Alabama. We as an organization will be doing several $100,000 of branding and advertising for that logo a year. So that buy local beef that you see there is actually a billboard that is running now. It started on May 1st and will run through the end of July. And it is in a couple markets across the state on digital billboards. So we're just driving people to that database. And once you get to that database, then you can see a map here on the left. You can search by product, and I have it there searched for the beef category. So all of those little dots are producers that are growing local beef and have local beef available. And we want to get more dots on that map. So you can click on those dots or the farm names there under the map, and then you will see what is there on the right for JKW Cattle Company. That is Justin's profile, and you are able to customize that however you'd like it to look. So you can change that description of your farm. The location is there. It's not on this page, but in the right-hand side, where to the right of his address there, your email address, phone number, Facebook page, all of that information is on your database page so that consumers can find you. I had a grower last week from Sylacauga tell me, he called me, he was like, Ellie, I already sold a whole hog from the database, so my membership has completely been paid for because of that. So, if you can get just a few customers that are willing to buy some big products from you, your membership can be covered very quickly because of this database. And we are going to do everything in our power to get consumers to use this heavily and to look for your products before anything else. This is a membership program, so the $1 million question is, what does this cost me and why should I do it? That database is the number one reason you should do this, as well as the ability to use the logo on your products. So if you set up at the market, or if you set up on farm, or if you sell to a restaurant or a store, your product can be branded as Sweet Grown Alabama and have that logo on the product. So it's almost like a stamp of approval for a consumer that all of those things that you say about being local and family friendly and wholesome, all of those things are true. We are a part of Sweet Grown Alabama. In addition, myself and my network of folks that I work with are happy to provide marketing and supply chain support. So, I mentioned Facebook webinars. We have a whole kind of slew of those things in our agenda to get done this year, as well as connecting people to sales outlets. So, I had a grower that was really interested in getting in grocery, and Mitchell Grocery Distributor reached out to me and said, how can we support local? What farmers can we work with? And I was able to connect the two of them, and they're looking now to see if they can work something out to get some of these local beef products in North Alabama grocery stores. So we do everything that we can to advocate for you and are flexible on how we can best help you. So that is our website, sweetgrownalabama.org, and the membership application is all online. So if you visit that website, check out the database, and think that this is something that you would like to be interested in, I would definitely encourage you to click that Why Join tab and fill out the membership application. Basically, the process is you send in the application and I have to approve that application. And then once you're approved and paid, we will get you all set up in the database and with the logo so that you can begin taking advantage of those marketing benefits. So that is kind of Sweet Grown Alabama in a nutshell. We are still growing and still looking for great farmer members, and we would love to absolutely get you involved in that program and help you sell direct to consumer. This is my contact information. Please take a picture, write that down, whatever you would like to do. I am more than happy to help you in any way that I can, whatever that looks like, and would love to answer any questions that y'all have about Sweet Grown Alabama as well. So feel free to save my information and let me know if there are ways that I can help you. Does anybody have any questions now? Allie, did we have any questions in chat while I'm talking?
We had 2 questions and they kind of go a little hand in hand. One was asking, how is selling my product from consumer to consumer regulated by USDA? And then the next question was, with farmers markets, how has guidelines been changed such that meat can be sold through the venue? As above question, how will that be regulated? So I don't know if you and Alex both want to answer this question.
Yeah, some of that I may touch on just a little bit in my presentation. If I don't, maybe we can circle back to it at the end if that works, just from a time perspective. We're not running out of time, but we are running a little long.
I figured you were covering it, but I just figured I'd ask before we get started. So go ahead.
So yeah, Ellie, if you want to make me the host real quick, if that's all right. I'll probably stop sharing the screen. I think you may have to.
All right, be good to go.
Okay. All right. Well, let me see if I can get all my technology running on my side now. Can everybody see my screen there? Marketing, meat, direct consumers. Does that look good?
Yes.
Yes, no. Perfect. Thanks, Janet. Well, I appreciate you guys hanging with us through that. I think Ellie did a fantastic job. I'm really excited about Sweet Grown Alabama, and I think she did a fantastic job talking about some of the marketing stuff. She does a lot better job working on that than I do, for sure. And so, the part I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about after Ellie got finished is, all right, we've talked about how to raise this animal. We've spent some time talking about processors on Wednesday. Ellie's done a good job really talking to us about marketing and how to get that product in front of consumers and get them to take a look at it at least, or take a look at your farm. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you've got to figure out how to price your product. And you've got to come up with some way that makes sense to you and makes sense to your consumer on how to put a price on what you're producing. And so that's what we're going to kind of spend some time on this afternoon, or the rest of the time we've got in here. And then when we get done, we'd love to answer any questions you guys have got about that. So ultimately, there are 2 different ways that we can sell locally produced meat products. And I think we've highlighted this 2 or 3 times now at this point, but we can either sell them as a whole animal, whole, half, or quarter animal, or sell them as individual cuts. And so, just like Dr. Sawyer talked about a lot on Wednesday, that whole, half, quarter animal, that's probably about the simplest way to go about what we're going to do. Okay, so if we're selling a whole animal, we could use a custom exempt plant. There's a lot of those that exist around the state. It's very simple. It's no different than you taking a calf to the stockyard, or selling a replacement female to somebody else, or selling a bull. You agree on a price, they buy the animal. The only difference is, rather than picking them up and taking it to their farm, you may deliver it to a processor. And at that point, there's really very little in the way of regulation. Okay, so USDA is not terribly concerned about that. You're using a custom plant, so the person that owns the animal is having the animal processed for their home consumption. So it's really not all that difficult. Individual cuts are the exact opposite. Okay, and we're going to spend a good bit of time talking about the individual cuts and how that works. But again, just highlighting some of the pieces of that. Right, if we're going to sell those products inside the state of Alabama, they have to be processed at least a state-inspected facility. If we want to cross state lines and go into Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, wherever, we've got to have those processed at one of our handful of federally inspected facilities, or the TA plants would be another name for some of those. This has got a lot more regulation. You know, that it doesn't end when you drop the animal off the processor. That's really just the beginning of the process when you drop it off at the processor there. And again, it's pretty highly regulated. So it's got to go through those state inspected facilities. And there's some business aspects of it that are regulated as well once you go to start selling those cuts. So let's just kind of dive off into it. I mean, this is the question I think everybody has, or at least the question I get fairly frequently. How much do I need to charge for my animal? And my answer is, well, how much do you want to charge for your animal? In reality, there's no real set pricing structure. Okay, you know, you can do it however you want to do it. And there are probably as many different ways to price these animals and to price your meat products as there are different people in the world that might do it. Okay, so there's several factors that you might want to consider and think about for a relative value of your animals, and to give you at least some guidance on pricing. You know, there are we sell fat finished cattle, finished hogs every day across the country in a commodity market. So those animals have an intrinsic value that they are worth as a commodity. Okay, we're trying to add some value to them. You're trying to create a value-added product. You're not trying to play in the commodity market, but they have a commodity value, and so that can give you an idea of at least, you know, a bottom dollar figure what they're worth. We might take a look at what's happening. If you're going to be selling cuts of meat, maybe you want to compare yourself to local grocery stores, and see what, you know, be kind of price competitive with what's happening. And again, in that commodity market, maybe you want to say, hey, look, I'm producing a premium product. I think I need to do better. You're going to need to pay me more than what you can go to Walmart and buy meat for. Kind of keeping your ear to the ground on what's happening in the freezer beef or freezer pork market around your area. It's pretty easy to find what some other guys are selling. You may not be finding what everybody's selling their products for, but you know, it's not very difficult to hear what prices animals are being sold for around the state. And we'll talk about that some in a minute. The biggest thing I do want to talk, and we're going to spend a good bit of time about, is really understanding what your cost of production is on producing these animals, and making sure we cover that cost. I think that's something I know with our farm at home, my family farm that I grew up on, we sometimes don't always do the greatest job of understanding exactly what it costs us to produce a calf every year. We get real fired up about what we can sell them for, but I probably couldn't tell you exactly how much we're truly making from a profit standpoint. And then this whole idea of price discovery that's in the cattle industry right now, with all the craziness going on in the finished market and the commodity market, this term of price discovery we all like to talk about. See what consumers are willing to pay for it. I don't want to call it price gouging. You know, you don't want to run it up there and charge triple or double or quadruple what everybody else is. But consumers may be willing to pay a little bit more for your product than what you think they are. And part of that's telling the story of exactly what you're producing, but also making sure they understand, all right, if I'm spending $3,000 on an animal, what does that translate to in meat cost? And kind of what am I getting back here compared to what I could be purchasing if I was willing to go a more traditional route. So kind of looking at some individual pieces of this. The first thing, you know, we can kind of look at would be that actual live animal sales, the commodity market out there. A couple of different ways to look at that. You know, locally, we can look at market reports that are either put out. A lot of the local stockyards put out their own market reports weekly through their Facebook pages or their websites that you can go look at and see what animals are selling for at the local market. The Ag Marketing Service of USDA or AMS, we're very fortunate here in Alabama. They report all of the markets almost every single week. And so every week you can go onto the USDA website, ams.usda.gov, and you can look up Alabama livestock sales and see what cattle sell for in our area. Now, that's not going to tell you what a fat 1,300-pound steer is worth. It's probably not going to tell you what a 280-pound market hog's worth. Might give you a decent idea on what some sheep and goats are worth for some of the regional sales when those happen. So if you want to find what that what that commodity market is for finished animals, you're probably going to have to go look again in this USDA market reporting website to find some of those. So for cattle, for example, there are some finished livestock, what they call weighted average direct slaughter cattle reports that you can look up. This is one of them. They do them regionally. I wanted to pull one of them up. I hope everybody can see it and look at it. I pulled it up last night for everybody to look at. This would be what they call the 5 area daily weighted average. So this is all of the finished cattle sold kind of in the southern plains, Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, and Iowa. So you can see here, it's got it reported a lot of different ways. Here's the number of cattle that were sold, or number of steers that were sold yesterday. I think this was by noon. They typically do them twice a day, if I'm not mistaken. The total number that were sold cash, what they weighed on average, and what they were paid per pound. They were paid $1.1348 per pound for these 1,455 pound steers, finished, ready for slaughter. And it's even got it broke down into, fairly high quality cattle that we're going to grade 80% choice or better versus some of the more average type cattle. You can also see it, they've got it on here versus heifers. And I believe down here at the bottom, they have it in a dressed percentage. So you can look heifers instead of on a live price. If you wanted to base it on a carcass weight basis, yesterday they sold 5,000 head of heifers across the 5 area that averaged 846 pound carcass, and they got $1.82 a pound for those carcasses. So that's one way to look and at least see what's going on there. Again, we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about that, but it tells you a little bit about the commodity market at least and what's happening there. We can also look at the futures market. So you can go through the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and every day during the week, futures contracts are traded that should give us an idea of what commodity fat cattle, if we're looking at live cattle contracts, or lean hogs, if we're looking at finished feeder pigs, are going to bring. It should give you a decent idea of what they're going to sell for in the future. So you can see those futures contracts are way out there, 18 months out in advance. And you should be able to look at that and say, okay, well, the futures market says that April cattle of 2021 are going to be worth about $1.15 today, we think. Unfortunately, right now, for whatever reason, the futures market is wildly different than what's happening in the actual cash market. The current contract month, June, is trading at around 95 cents a pound for fat cattle, where actual cattle you just saw on that market report a minute ago are selling for more like $1.15. So the live cattle contracts and futures contracts that system seems to be kind of broken right now, and it definitely isn't a great indication of what's happening in the market today. But these don't represent the product you have. Okay, you don't have a truckload of steers standing in Kansas or Iowa or Nebraska or Texas that you're going to sell to Cargill or National or one of the major beef packers. You don't have a truckload of fat pigs ready to go to slaughter at Smithfield in Iowa or somewhere like that. You have a product, a totally different product. You have it here for the consumer. Your product is going to be a direct sales product, and in some of this, you're taking over some control and creating almost a little bit of a vertically integrated system. So if you're a cow-calf producer that's thinking about this, you've controlled every portion of this animal's life. And if you decide to get into selling cuts of meat, not only are you taking control of all of the profitability options in the live animal production phase, you're not probably going to take advantage of the profitability in the packing industry. You're going to pay somebody to harvest that animal, but you're going to give yourself the opportunity to take advantage of all the pricing and profitability potential in the retail sector, which is big. The retail markup on a lot of our products when they come out of the packing plants can be as much as 20, 30, 40, 50%. And so this jump from a commodity calf steer to to selling a beef product that is a niche product at the retail level, there's a wide variation in what those two things are worth, okay? So it's definitely not using those live animal prices that we can find online, maybe not the best place to start. When I'm kind of thinking about how to do this, the first thing I think you need to start with is really doing a pretty decent analysis of what your costs are. And this doesn't have to be crazy complicated, okay? All we've got to do, this is a pretty simple formula here, what was the animal worth at some given time? For a lot of us, I know cow-calf producers, again, I'm one of them. It's pretty tough sometimes for us to put a value on exactly what it cost us to produce a calf at weaning, or maybe we don't do a good job of it. We should do a better job of it. But we know at weaning time, we could take that calf to our local stockyard and sell it for some value. Okay, so we know what that weaned calf is worth. From then, if you do a decent job with your nutritional management, you should know roughly exactly how much feed goes in front of that animal, what that feed costs, how much you're having to put into it from a vaccine standpoint. You should know all the production costs it's going to take you to get that animal to slaughter weight. And you can add those two numbers together and give you an idea of your total cost of production. So kind of walking through that example, right now, let's say you started with a 550-pound freshly weaned steer that you're going to try and finish off the farm. Here in Alabama, I think this is a little high right now, but let's say it's $1.50 a pound. So that calf was worth $825. If you didn't want to mess with the rest of this and you just wanted to take him to wherever, Coleman, sell him, and go ahead and cash out, he's worth $825. Okay, and we need to make sure that we figure that we're at least going to get paid that much moving backwards, or it's not worth doing. All right, just throwing some rough numbers from a feed perspective. We know what our hay is costing us, what our feed ingredients are going to cost. You can kind of estimate what you're going to need to get that animal finished based on some of the stuff we talked about on Monday. And definitely by the time you get done, you should be able to look back and put together a really good budget on what you spent. Never forget that you need to include a mineral in with these animals. That's incredibly important. That's got some amount of cost. And so our total cost of production from a production standpoint, feed standpoint, and a live animal standpoint to produce a finished steer really isn't all that crazy. $1,185, give or take a little bit. And hopefully we're going to come out of this with a 1,250-pound steer in our example. Now, what other costs might we have? All right. You're probably going to have some amount of veterinarian costs. You had to castrate that calf at some point. You probably vaccinated him. Did he get sick? You're using some amount of equipment, whether that's just a tractor to move hay in and out of the lot, whether you're having to buy a feeding system. Your time is worth something. We are the world's worst in any type of business to never account for what our time is worth and that we actually spend time doing these things. Okay, calves don't feed themselves. Calves don't work themselves. Calves don't deliver themselves to the packer. If they did, life would be a whole lot easier and a lot cheaper. It doesn't work that way though, right? And so even if you're just going out back every afternoon after you get home from work, it still takes you 10 or 15 minutes to feed your animals every day. That's worth something. And then make sure you build in a profit. Again, we're not doing this just for fun, or at least we shouldn't be. If you're not building yourself a profit in here, why do it? And don't be afraid to build in a profit that's fairly large. So just playing with some numbers, and you may have $50 in veterinarian cost. If we say it takes you 7.5 hours to finish that animal over its life, which I think is not completely inaccurate, we may have $50 tied up in labor. Our equipment, again, we're wearing equipment out doing this. We've got some equipment cost in there. And then I put a profit margin in there. If I was going to do this myself, I'd want to make $500 more on this animal than what I could do just running him through the commodity market. If I'm going to go through all the trouble it takes, maybe 500 is too much for you. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe you think you need to make $1,000 a head. I don't know. But if I'm going to take all the trouble to keep this animal for 13, 14, 15, 18 months, 20 months, deliver it to the processor, do some marketing, all that, I want to get paid for it. Okay, I could be doing something else with my time. So now we've got all these things tied in. Okay, now we've got to be able to recover $1,892 to meet our profit targets. Okay, so we got a 1,250-pound animal. that means we're going to need to sell that calf for no less than $1.50 a pound live weight to recover our cost. Okay, if we're, and that's kind of in the range of what's typical. When I'm talking to a lot of our folks like y'all that are doing freezer beef, $1.50 to $2.50 a pound live weight seems to be kind of the general trend. Most folks are kind of floating in that $2 a pound live weight range. And we'll play the math out here in a minute on what that turns into in a meat cost perspective, but that seems pretty typical. Now, that can include, in this price, you could include your processing costs if you wanted to sell that as part of the package, even using a custom exempt plant. I made sure to get some clarification on that from our inspection service. You could build that into your pricing structure if you wanted to. You don't have to, but you can. Definitely you're going to want to if you're selling cuts of meat, no doubt. And so if we're going to sell whole animals direct to consumers, that's probably the end. That's about as complex as it gets. Now, if you're wanting to sell cuts of meat, you've not even begun to work. I mean, you've done half the work at best. All right. At the point that you decide we're going to start selling steaks and roasts and ground beef, all of a sudden now you've added an entirely new level of complexity to your life and to your operation. And to the point that there's several things to think about. All right. So first, after we have to pick that animal back up as meat products, all of a sudden that's a food product now. So what we call the cold chain, or the cold storage and transportation supply chain from leaving the packer until it gets to the final consumer, whether that's you're selling at a farmer's market, or you're selling to a restaurant, or you're selling out of the back of your house. That's important. It's got to keep product under 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, it's got to protect the integrity of the packaging that it's in. It has to make sure that product is unadulterated. And you probably need to think about keeping records on that. Records on freezer temperatures, records on cooler temperatures. If you're going to do this in any amount of volume and do it over a long period of time, you probably want to think about potentially investing in some temperature monitoring devices, not just thermometers, but thermometers that can record temperature, so that if you have some sort of spike in temp, you know about it and you know how to deal with it. All of that gets expensive. If you're big enough that you think about buying a small reefer truck, or a reefer refrigerated bed to go on a pickup truck or something, those are not cheap. Walk-in coolers are not cheap. So again, there's a lot of added costs there. When you begin to figure out where you're going to outlet your product, there are a lot of steps that are involved at that point. You're no longer at the point that you stop selling whole animals and begin to sell cuts of meat. You are no longer a farmer. You are a retailer. You are selling a value-added product, and you're in the meat business. You're in the finished goods business. And the government feels that that's very different. Selling a finished product ready for consumer is very, very different than selling a commodity animal into the commodity market. Okay, so when you start selling cuts of meat, it's very likely you're going to need to get a business license. You may not only need to get a business license in the county that you live in, you may need to get a business license in the county that you're going to sell product in. So a great example is folks that live around the Birmingham area that try to sell product at like Pepper's Place Market or one of the farmers markets in Birmingham. Okay, you may need to get a business license in the county you live in, Talladega County, Blount County, Walker County, wherever you happen to be, but you're definitely going to need to get one in Jefferson County. All right. And now all of a sudden, as a retailer, you're not dealing with, one large check that somebody can write for $3,000 to buy your animal. Now you're dealing with 100 small transactions of $25, $30, $40. You're dealing with consumer sales. You've got to have the ability to handle not only cash and checks, but some sort of electronic payment method, whether that's debit, credit cards, Venmo, PayPal, some of these other Apple Pay, things like that. One of our agents that does a little bit of this on the side, I was actually talking to him on the phone earlier, and he's doing some sales in the Birmingham area, and where they normally sell 90+% of their product using debit card and credit card. Right now, through COVID-19, 100% of their sales are using a debit and credit card with I think it's called Square app on their phone. Okay, so If you're unwilling to do some of that stuff, you probably don't need to sell cuts of meat. You need to sell whole animals. Record keeping is critical. And then also understanding the fact that, again, you're a business and you're liable for some taxes that you weren't liable for as a farming enterprise. So again, you're selling a consumer retail product. You've got to account for sales tax, whether you charge it on top of the price you want to charge for your product or you account it into the price that you want to charge. If you're in Alabama, you've got to charge Alabama, or you've got to account for state sales tax, which is 4%. You're going to have county sales tax in many counties. And then if you're selling inside a municipality, you'll also have for a lot of cities, Birmingham being a good example, you're also going to have a city sales tax. Okay, not only do you have to charge that on every product, those have to be turned in monthly. If I'm not mistaken, and this is something you would want to check into before you get into it, you have to turn in a report the 20th of every month to our state government on exactly how much sales you had. If you miss that by a day, there are penalties associated with it. Even if you don't sell any product and you have a 0 sales month, if you don't turn in a report on how much sales you had, it's a $50 fine. And by the time you do a $50 fine with the state, a $50 fine with the government, with the county government, and a $50 fine with the city of Birmingham or whatever municipality you're in, all of a sudden I've racked up, $250, $200 in fines when I didn't sell a single product because I missed a date, a deadline to turn in a sheet to all those entities. So those are really big deals. And then on top of that, that's not even including the income tax and the other taxes associated with making a profit in your business. That's just sales tax alone. Okay, so this becomes incredibly complex very quickly if we're not careful. Now, if I haven't scared you off at this point and basically forced you back into selling whole animals, and in all honesty, I mean, this is doable. None of these things are all that complicated or hard. Well, they're complicated. None of them are all that hard, but you've got to be willing to do the details, to do the little pieces of work in there and make it all happen. I think it's a really good opportunity for large farms that maybe have kids coming back to the farm or spouses that want to get more involved and want to do something different. Maybe you've got some member of the family in the family farm that, they don't really enjoy driving the tractor and plowing fields and spraying fields as much. The farming side's not their interest, but the marketing side is. This can be a place you can cut them loose and really add a lot of value to the farm by being willing to do a lot of the tough pieces of this. And so ultimately, when you get through all that and you say, hey, you haven't scared me off yet, I still want to sell cuts of meat, you got to figure out how to price individual cuts. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. First, we need to kind of think some about, well, what have we got? What's this animal worth from a meat value perspective? If we've got that 1,250 pound live weight animal that we want to charge $2 a pound for, we need to recover $2,500 is what we need to sell the animal for. All right. If we include our processing cost, which if you're going to sell cuts of meat, you would, now that's up to a little over right at $3,100 plus sales tax on top of that. If we didn't include the sales tax and we say that we would get back about 60% of the carcass weight in meat, that's putting us at about $6.65 a pound for retail sales, retail product coming out the back door. Now, is that $6.65 a pound ground beef and roasts and steaks and fillets and everything else? Well, you could do it that way, but there would be some folks pretty aggravated with you that your ground beef is $1 a pound more than what they can buy it for at Walmart, but they would be real excited to get fillets for about a third of the price that they're really worth. So how do we calculate some of that? There's not a really good answer to that question. What I will show you are a couple of things that we use here on campus. So this is I hope everybody can see this spreadsheet. It's lit up in all kinds of pretty colors and lots of numbers, and I understand it's maybe a little intimidating when you first look at it, but this is a spreadsheet that one of our former meat scientists, Dr. Chris Kurth, put together back in the early 2000s to help our meat lab on campus do exactly what we're trying to do now. When we purchase an animal for harvest from the other animal units on campus, how do we turn that into live animal sales. So it's been modified over the years by our meat lab manager, Barney. And then the last couple of days I've taken it and really modified it heavily to try and fit it into what you might be interested in doing as a farmer trying to sell local product. But, you know, again, we can looking at live weights and what we want to charge for that animal, processing costs. We can come up with a kind of a wholesale value for the carcass. Plus, then you start to tie in some of these taxes. Maybe you've got some sort of commission. You could put another fee in this calculator for if you sold somewhere, they charge you commission or some sort of per head charge. And now we've added another nearly $200 what we have to charge for this animal. And then basically the way this thing works is it's got, we kind of come up with some values for roughly what the yield for each one of these pieces is going to be. In a carcass of this size that shrinks and is about a yield grade 3, you should come up with maybe 150 or so pounds of ground beef if you get all these other cuts. And then, you know, your tenderloins, we think if we were trying to get back to this $2 a pound value, maybe you need to charge $2 a pound for that 13 pounds of tenderloin cut into steaks, boneless steaks. Or you could do T-bones here at $10 a pound with the bone still in it. I would be more than happy to share some of this with any of you guys if you're interested in taking a look at it. I make no claims that this is a really polished product. It's something we've used for internal use for a long time. It's worked really good for us, and I've tried to modify it. And honestly, over the next couple of years, I'm going to kind of take this and try and work on it and continue to hone it and add more values back into it and make it better and better and better. But it's something I tried to get put together on a relatively quick notice once we decided we were going to do this meeting. But the one thing it'll also do that I wanted to kind of show you here is it shows us a little bit about some weights on here. So brisket would be a great example. Our calculation on here would show that with a 1,250 pound animal, 775 pound carcass, you know, we should have about 15 pounds of brisket to sell. So those are 2 kind of 7 pound briskets. That might be a little on the light side, but it's fairly close. Well, what if our animal instead was 1,000 pounds? Those briskets get pretty tiny pretty quick. And you know, all of our portions start to get fairly small. Same thing if we go the opposite direction. We make a 1,400 pound steer, not a 14,000, like kill an elephant. It's a 1,400 pound steer. And so, you know, as we kind of think about how much of this do we want to mess with, this first sheet on this one, I've actually got it broken in a couple of different ways too. This first sheet has got as many different steaks and roasts as you're probably ever going to find. Tri-tips, very few of our processors in Alabama are going to pull tri-tips out for you. Flat iron steaks, versus what I've also done is put together, the second one is maybe a little bit more typical of what you might find at most of our small packing houses here in Alabama, where you're still going to get all of your strips, fillets, sirloins, ribeyes, chuck roll roasts, round roast, maybe that you could cut into steaks or cube steak, and a good bit more ground beef. But what I wanted to illustrate there, and then the final one here would be basically grinding everything except some pretty nice chuck roasts and the steaks you would get. But the thing I wanted to illustrate on this is that if you'll notice, the more of these things we can pull out and add value to, so flank steak, you know, we can make that 3 pounds worth $8. Skirt steak, we could pull that out and add value to it. The flat irons, all of these round cuts, you know, those things are a value, what I would somewhat consider value added products. If we can add some value there, we can either make our ground beef a little bit more expensive and make more profit, or we can drop the price of our ground beef and help move it a little quicker. As we start to grind some of those pieces, so instead of having skirts and flat irons and some of the value added cuts that maybe it'll be harder to get, all of a sudden we end up with more ground beef, but that ground beef has got to be a larger portion of what we pay back for this animal. So our ground beef is going to get more expensive, kind of plain and simple. And then definitely if you try to be real quick, simple, and easy and just get steaks and ground, all of a sudden we've jumped from ground beef running right at the $4 a pound, $4.15 a pound mark for a break even up to nearly $5 a pound. And I could play in a scenario here where we could, especially if you really didn't want to charge this much for your steaks, if you said, hey, I don't think my consumers are willing to pay $20 a pound for tenderloins, I need to move that down to 15, that's fine. But understand that if you can't get some value out of these really nice cuts of meat, your ground beef's got to be fairly expensive. You're going to have to run that on up there at $6, $7 a pound to do so. So I know this spreadsheet's incredibly complicated. Like I said, I'd love to share it with some of you, but again, I think it kind of goes back to the point of, if you're going to sell cuts of meat, I'm not saying you have to be an Excel wizard, but you probably need to be able to do some of this work. Even if it's not using a real complicated spreadsheet like this, at least coming up with a carcass value, what you think that carcass is worth, weighing out all the cuts that you get back, and trying to assign a value to those cuts to make sure you cover the cost and don't lose any value because we've miscalculated somewhere on value. And so if we were going to do that instead of using our nice, pretty complicated Excel spreadsheet, if you just kind of wanted to use some general rules of thumb, typically your steaks are going to be most expensive. And I'm not telling you guys anything that you haven't seen when you walk through Walmart or some other grocery store. But our steaks are going to be the most valuable thing on the carcass. They should be. All right, fillets are going to be the top notch. They should be more per pound than anything else out there. It's the most tender cut. It's also the smallest, one of the smaller cuts on the animal. It's going to be followed by ribeyes, but actually probably not very closely followed by ribeyes. There may be a $3 or $4 a pound gap there between what you charge for fillets and ribeyes. Your strip steaks are very similar in price typically to ribeyes, either equal in price or maybe just a little below typically. Sirloins, flat irons, flank steaks, petite tenders, all of the other value-added cuts, I generally like to think are valued about the same as a sirloin. Some of them, like a flat iron, you could start to run those up closer to a New York strip price because they are going to give you a really nice eating experience. But by and large, most folks, when they're buying those, they're not looking to replace the ribeye that they want. They're looking to find a nice steak product that replaces the sirloin that they were going to buy. As we keep moving backwards in price, briskets are probably the next most valuable thing on the carcass from a price per pound standpoint. They're definitely going to be less than all of those steak products. And I also say this on steaks. When we're talking steaks, I do not mean round steaks or some of the tougher cuts of steak, like a bottom round steak or top round steak or eye of the round steak, a mock tender steak. Okay, those are steak in name only. They're steak because they're cut thin. They're not steak because they're tender. All right, and they don't need to be priced that way either. We're only, our tender cuts are what we're going to price the highest here. And there are some chuck eye steaks, for example, Denver cut steaks. Those are things that you're probably not going to get from one of our local packing houses in Alabama because they're specialty cuts, and you may have to pay a little more to get them if you do want them. But they could be priced pretty similar to sirloins if you wanted to. Briskets will be a little behind that. Maybe some of the other specialty cuts may fall in there as well, things like tri-tip, if you can get it. Okay, so behind that, we would be starting to work into our roasts. These might be somewhere between half to a third the price of what your ribeye steaks are going to run. But they're definitely going to be more expensive than your ground beef, maybe to the tune of a pound to $1 to $1.50 a pound more than whatever you're charging, maybe even as much as $2 a pound more for chuck steaks or chuck roast, more than what you charge for ground. And then your ground beef is going to be the cheapest thing you have, probably to the tune of about 25% of whatever you're charging for fillets and ribeyes. And then when we look in the commodity industry, this changes seasonally, right? So during the grilling season, when there's big time demand for steaks, this gap widens a little bit. Steaks might become a little bit more valuable. Ground beef becomes a good bit cheaper. Maybe not becoming that much cheaper, but definitely steaks are becoming more valuable. As we get into the winter, after grilling season's over, that price gap maybe begins to narrow a little bit. Steaks definitely come down in price and get a little closer to everything else. In times of, which again, you're dealing in a niche product, a niche market, you're probably not going to be hit by things like this as much. But definitely as we start to work into times of economic recession, anytime that money becomes a little scarce or folks are getting a little bit more concerned about spending money, the first thing they're cutting out of their food budget, are things like steaks, the expensive cuts, and they're going to spend more money on ground beef. And so during those times, we typically see, the price of steaks and those sort of things drop and start to get a little closer to ground beef price, mostly because the demand for them goes away. Again, Those are things we see in the commodity market. They're maybe not quite as applicable to you selling individual cuts at a farmer's market. You're probably dealing with a fairly high-end clientele as it is already. But again, just some general rules of thumb. So just some big conclusions as we get done with this, and would love to start taking questions. You know, pricing and marketing, this stuff isn't, the stuff you're working with isn't cheap. You know, if you want to stay easy, if you like farming, you like raising animals, and you just want to add some value to the carcasses, but you're really not interested in doing a lot of the extra work that goes into being a retail salesperson, stick to selling whole animals, quarters, halves, that sort of thing. It's simple, it's easy, doesn't take a tremendous amount of work, or it doesn't take a lot of added facilities on your farm either. If you want to sell cuts of meat, again, it takes a lot of marketing and business savvy. You need to be able to really hone in on exactly what your cost of production is, how you're going to handle all the taxes and everything that goes with it. It's worth it. I mean, I think you can think about charging a good bit more for your products doing it that way, but it is a lot of work, and you're going to want to, it's something you're going to want to devote a lot of time to. And if you're a person that, between the 5 different things you've got going on the farm already, you don't have time to add another enterprise, selling cuts of meat isn't what you want to get into, I don't believe. Again, make sure we're covering our cost of production and you're profitable. Make sure you build yourself some profit in. If you can't make more than $150 or $200 a head doing this, in my opinion, this is completely an opinion of mine, but if you can't figure out a way to make that much profit, or at least or way more, this is way more work than it's probably worth doing, honestly. But I don't think that's a hard thing to do either. I really don't believe that you're going to be thinking about, you know, relatively small profits in this business venture. So with that, we've run a little over on time, and I'll apologize for that. I took longer than I expected. If you've got any questions for myself or for Ellie or for Allie, I think Dr. Sawyer's on here, or he was a little while ago. We would love to take some of those. I saw, see if I can get the.
Yeah, there was one question from Cynthia saying, if we decide to sell cuts of meat on our own farm, do you still need to get a business license, or are we covered as a farmer that grew the product at our farm? And that would be on a sporadic basis.
Yes, the answer to that is yes. Not only do you still need to talk to your local municipality about a business license, but you still need to be prepared to pay sales tax. Again, remember, it's not necessarily about where you're selling the product. It's about the fact that you've added value to that product. Now, again, talking to some farmers I work with in some rural communities, some of the small rural communities and counties are willing to give exemptions on sales tax. Their local sales tax, at least, to selling direct off the farm. But you are going to have to pay, you are going to have to make sure you account for state sales tax. And again, same thing, most of those small municipalities, they want you to get a business license so they know where you're at, and they have you on record. But if they do give you some sort of exemption on sales tax, or an exemption on getting a business license or something like that, get that in writing. I'm always of the opinion in these businesses like this that you're better to err on the side of caution. You know, talk to the people, talk to your local government about what they might want you to do. The most they can ever tell you is yes, you got to do it. The best thing that can happen sometimes is them give you exemptions like that, but you want to make sure you're covered. You don't want to get caught or get in trouble for, you know, selling $3,000 or $4,000 worth of product and not doing things appropriately, and it costs you way more than what you ever were going to make in that business venture. So yes, long answer to a short question. Yes, you do need to pursue getting a business license on those small volumes.
And also, I got a private question of the person from Wednesday that is thinking of building their own processing area. They had a kind of a follow-up question of if they build a processing area and cooler on their farm, how is that regulated, and what are the ballpark costs for these regulations and inspections?
Great question.
To sell consumer to consumer, maybe consumer to restaurant if possible. And then he went on to say, if I'm selling quarter cows and have the consumer pick up the meat directly from the processor, am I still a retailer?
All good questions. All right, so let's start with the question about building a plant on your property and the regulations associated with that. So if you're going to sell retail product, if it's going to go to a farmer's market, if it doesn't matter where it goes, if it's going to be sold by the piece to anyone, it has to be processed under at least state level inspection in a state inspected facility. And if it's going to cross state lines, it has to be inspected in a federally inspected facility by federal inspectors or TA inspectors. So if you were to build your own processing plant on your farm, only to process your own animals, to sell cuts of meat, you still have to have that. Your plant then would have to be an inspected facility. All right. From a cost perspective, there is no cost for inspection. All right. Inspection is paid for by the government. It's paid for by tax dollars because it's ensuring food safety. Anything that ensures food safety is not a charge to the processor. Now, if you wanted some grading done, one, you probably couldn't get product graded in small volume like that. But if you wanted to get grading done, that is something you have to pay for. But inspection's free. Now, it's free to have inspection done, but the regulations on building the plant, as far as making sure it meets all the USDA guidelines and everything you would want done there, may cause the plant itself to be a little bit more expensive. If you were going to do custom and sell and just build a custom plant and sell, live animals, and then you process them in a plant that you own, again, that plant would have to fall under all the regulations that a custom exempt plant would. So it still has to be inspected by the same inspectors. They just won't be present during processing. They're going to come by and check for cleanliness, check your records, check what you're doing. There really isn't any situation where you're going to, throw up a pole barn with a squeeze chute in it and start killing cattle and putting them in a reefer truck. I don't know if that's the question that's being asked here. I'm not trying to belittle the point here at all, but building a processing plant is not a cheap venture. I think it's a worthwhile venture, and I hope we have some folks in here that are interested in doing it. But there's nothing cheap about building a plant. And even if you were only going to kill 10 or 15 animals a year, or even if you're only going to kill 50 animals a year of your own, that plant still has to have some square footage. The concrete costs the same, the building costs the same, whether you run 10 animals through it or 1,000 animals through it. So the question about consumer to consumer, really anytime a meat product is being sold, it has to have the mark of inspection. Anytime it's being sold as a meat product to anyone, it has to have the mark of inspection on the label. All right, so it has to have a label. That label has to have 7 things on it. It has to have the product name, net weight statement, an address, a safe handling instruction, ingredient statement. There's a couple of more that I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll be glad to get those for whoever's interested. But it has to have a label that meets all those specifications. On that label, it also has to have the mark of inspection. So for a state inspected facility or a product that we sold inside the state, it has to have that Alabama state seal or the Alabama state mark that has the plant number at the plant at which it was processed. Okay, whether it's being sold by a farmer, sold to a consumer, if you bought it as a consumer and you want to resell it to other consumers, if it's a restaurant selling it, if you want to sell to restaurants, doesn't matter. If it's being sold as a meat product, it has to be processed in a USDA processing facility or state inspected facility. And then from there, I'll be honest, I've got to do a little bit more research on what are the regulations. You're going to want to make sure, whether it's regulated or not, you're going to want to make sure you're able to keep that product under 40 degrees Fahrenheit for the entire time that you are in possession of it. If it's frozen, you're going to want to keep it frozen, obviously. It needs to, best you can, keep it out of direct sunlight because that can give you some meat discoloration issues. It needs to be, temperature needs to be monitored, product, the packaging integrity needs to stay in good shape. If let's say it's vacuum sealed and in transit you drop something on it and the seal's broken, well, that product really is no longer fit for sale. It has been damaged since it was produced and doesn't really fall under what that label claims it to be anymore. So those are the big pieces of that. Did I answer all the questions in that, Allie? Because there were several of them.
Yes. Also, to add to that person's question about building their own processing plant, I was listening to a webinar the other day through AgriLife Extension and North Dakota. If that's something you want to listen to, it really had a lot of good information as well, and I can send you that link personally if that helps you. It did help me a lot kind of understand the actual process of it. And I think he has another question. One second. He also messaged to clarify, if I take a cow to processor and the 4 people that I'm selling the processed quarters to pick the meat up directly from the processor, how am I regulated?
So great question. You're not. So the big thing there that you need to make sure you handle if you're selling product like that is it needs to be sold, transaction finished, sold, receipted, done before the animal is dropped off at the processor. And if you're going to sell it on a by the pound basis, you've got to sell it on a live weight basis. Okay. There have been some folks get in trouble here in Alabama for selling. Well, and I say that if you're going to sell it, if you're going to do it through a custom exempt plant, you have to do it that way. If you're going to sell the product through a state inspected or USDA plant, you could sell it on a carcass weight basis. But the big thing here is that if you sold the live animal, you sold the carcass, you sold, and they're paying for processing or whatever, there is no, at that point it's a custom kill, custom processing. They will probably label all of the product as not for retail sale or not for resale, and so now that product is just for the use of the purchaser of the animal or the owner of the animal. So in all reality, that's always been my point to folks that are interested in doing freezer beef. It's not that this selling live animals thing is the Wild West. There's nothing wrong going on there, but there's just really very little regulation if you decide to go that route, right? I mean, if you sell a 1,300-pound steer to 4 people, it would be no different than some of these large seed stock operations that sell these $1 million herd bulls and 10 people buy a piece of it, right? It's the exact same principle, just on a smaller scale with less money trading hands. So again, USDA is no longer involved at that point. It's kind of unimportant. Again, the big thing there though is if you're going to use a custom plant, all that has to be done before the plant enters the animal enters the plant. If you're using a state inspected facility, there's a little bit of leeway there. But again, custom plants, they have to be sold on a live animal, a live weight basis, or prior to slaughter on some other pre-negotiated live animal measurement.
Hey, Alex,
Yes,
one more question from him. If I'm trying to make the transaction easier and I pay the processor fee and absorb that into the live weight cost to these 4 people.
mm-hmm. That's perfectly legal. There's nothing wrong with that. I honestly, I've been confused about that for the last couple of years. I was always under the impression that if you're using a custom plant, you couldn't do that. But I got clarification from our inspection service last week on this exact question. And you can absorb that cost, put it into your animal price. The problem you're going to run into with that is the only issue I see there is if the processor charges you a per pound of hanging weight fee, you're not going to know exactly what that fee is going to be until the animal's processed. And so, but you need to go ahead and have the transaction done before it's dropped off at the processor. So you need to be able to do, and I think hopefully over the course of this week, we've given you enough information that you could at least roughly estimate what your carcass weight's going to be, and maybe roughly estimate what the processing costs are going to be. If you have a 1,200-pound animal, it's going to produce you a 750-pound carcass, and it's 75 cents a pound. Then you need to be able to get about $600 or whatever. Kind of rough estimate what your processing costs are going to be. But you would have to be kind of estimating processing cost in advance to do it that way. So it does make it simpler.
You see an Alex and all this, but you see what it's saying.
It's okay. You're still getting the delivery. But it is probably about the video times problem.
What other questions does anybody have?
I don't have any questions on the chat box end, but if anyone has any, speak up or forever hold your peace, I guess.
Right. Well, I mean, the good thing there is you've got my contact information. Ellie put her contact information up there earlier. Allie obviously has her contact information listed. Always, if you've got questions, if there's anything we can do, please call us. That's what we all do. That's what our jobs are here for. We really appreciate all of you guys making 3.5 hours worth of time for us over this week to be a part of this. Hope it was educational. Hope you learned a little bit. And maybe it's going to, hopefully it'll add some value to your operations. So anything else?
I think that's it. Thank you all for getting on the Zoom. Also, all of this information will be up on our website at bamabeef.org/bamabeef. And please stay tuned. I will email all of y'all with information as we go, but we should have a directory for freezer beef on our website, as well as possibly a PDF format of processors you can take your animals to, a list of it so that y'all can find it. So definitely, if y'all have any questions about that, about finding a processor or wanting to know more, contact me, Alex, or Ellie, or Jason Sawyer. Any of us are great contacts to have, like Alex said. So, but thank y'all again. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Ellie. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you guys for organizing this and putting it all together. We really appreciate it.
It's been great. Thank you, guys.